Thanks a lot for introducing me, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be here. So, as the chairman said, I'm going to speak about quantum information and high energy physics, and also how this idea was born. So, I will begin with some global overview of the quantum theory. So, originally, as we all know, quantum mechanics was originally named in this way because of the observation of quantized values. In particular, we observe quantized values in electromagnetic radiation, namely the black body spectrum and also the photoelectric effect. We also observe quantization in the atomic levels, which this is this atomic spectra. This of here is Vanta black, which is the blackest material ever made by man. And also we observe quantization of the angular momentum, which was revealed by the Stein-Gerlach experiment. As what you can see here is the original letter that was shared by, I think it was Gerlach to Max Born about his experiment. You see this doubling is the Stein-Gerlach experiment. So all of this quantum theory gave rise to the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, which is the mainstream interpretation of quantum mechanics and the one that most of us normally use to predict real experiments, in which we have the particle wave duality. With this leads to the superposition principle. We have that outcomes of measurements are described by these quantizations given by the eigenvalues of observables, which are Hermitian operators. This is what leads to the quantization of the values that I mentioned before. And the probability of the outcomes are given by the square of this wave, this wave function, and this leads to phenomena as interference. So all of this is very well exemplified by the concept of pure state. A pure state is an abstraction of this concept of a wave function. So this wave function is described as a unit vector, technically it's a unit ray in a Hilbert space. So because it's in this Hilbert space, we can expand it in any basis as a superposition of states with a well-defined phase. These numbers, these alphas, are complex values, are complex amplitudes. And all of this also gives rise to the Born's rule that predicts that a certain experiment, for instance, the observable A, if I expand this in a basis of eigenstates of this operator, these again are the eigenvalues, and when I take expectation value, I simply get the Born's rule. I get the eigenvalue an with the probability with a squared by this amplitude. So this gives a very interesting comparison, because in quantum mechanics, what we have is a probabilistic wave, not a probabilistic classical distribution as in classical mechanics. And also something very fundamental is that here randomness is something intrinsic to the best of our knowledge. Something fundamental. This contrasts with the normal classical mechanics or the normal statistics that we experience in our daily life, where the randomness typically arises from some kind of ignorance. We ignore some microscopic details of the project, some noise, some experimental variations of parameters. So the question is that, is God really playing dice with the universe? Well, it turns out that quantum mechanics says that God is well beyond a mere croupier of a casino, because this is manifested by the system of quantum correlations, which are correlations which cannot be accounted by any classical probability theory. And another way to simplify this is by the concept of entanglement. Imagine that we have a Hilbert space, which is bipartite, has two parties, A and B, which normally are referred to Alice and Bob. And this is the product state of the Hilbert space, the product of the Hilbert space, the tensor product. So in this case, we can define what are called separable states, which are just product states in these two Hilbert spaces, tensor product states. And these states are uncorrelated, because they're product states. However, the principle of quantum superposition allows to make a superposition of these product states. And this gives rise to the concept of entanglement. Entanglement is defined as the non-separability of a quantum state, and for a pure state, this is simplified by expressions in which I cannot express the total wave function as a product state. In particular, if I make this expansion in these coefficients, separability is equivalent to say that the rank of this matrix, this thought as a matrix, is rank 1. And for pure states, it happens that the existence of classical and quantum correlations, for instance, entanglement and Bellin non-locality, are equivalent. We will go to this in more detail for the Cauchy matrices, because the problem is that in real life, things are much more complicated. In experiments, we have noise in experiments, repetitions that vary parameters of the experiment, we have environments, we have subsystems. So we have to generalize the concept of pure state to the concept of the mixed state, which is described by a density matrix rho. So now, quantum states are not vectors, are operators. In particular, they are Hermitian non-negative operators with a unit trace. In the case of a pure state, is simply described as a projector, okay? A projector of this form. And in general, we can write any density matrix as an incoherent mixture of pure states, in particular, the eigenstates. You can always write the density matrix in this form, and these Pn are probabilities, like classical probabilities. They are not complex numbers. And we compute expectation values. We simply have the sum over the probabilities multiplied by the expectation value of each pure state. So, as you can see, this begins to connect more with the traditional wisdom of classical probability distributions. So, to study this problem in more detail, we are going to focus on the case of qubits because it's the most simple way to understand quantum mechanics. A qubit is simply a two-level quantum system. The most pragmatic example is a spin 1/2 particle, where instead of having 0, 1, we can say that 0 is the spin up and 1 is spin down. The most general wave function that I can write for a qubit takes this form of here, and actually I can always label it with n, because this means that this wave function is the eigenstate of the spin projection along the direction n, and indeed the projective measurements always give for this operator plus or minus 1, and these are described by these projectors. And because I have a unit vector, it turns out that the set of pure states is described by the surface of the unit sphere, which in this context is called the Bloch sphere. Oh, sorry. Now, when I go to the density matrix formalism, I go to a 2x2 Hermitian operator, and I can expand it in the usual basis of the Pauli matrices. And it turns out that a density matrix for a qubit is determined by just 3 parameters, which are the components of the Bloch vector, which is the vector of here, and this describes actually the spin polarization of the particle. When I have 2 qubits, I have the most simple example of a system that can display quantum correlations. In particular, in this case, because it's 2 qubits, the most general density matrix is a Hermitian matrix 4x4, and in this expansion, I have 15 parameters, which correspond to the expansion in terms of the Pauli matrices and the tensorial product. In particular, these 15 parameters are each individual spin polarization of each particle, 3 and 3, and then I have another 9 components which describe the spin correlations between the particles. That's the 15 parameters. And this actually connects with a more general concept, which is the concept of quantum tomography. Quantum tomography is the reconstruction of a quantum state from the measurement of a selected set of observables, of a kernel of observables. For 1 qubit, I can make quantum tomography by just measuring 3 parameters, the components of the Bloch vector, which are the polarizations, the spin polarizations of the particle. So if I measure these 3 numbers, these 3 expectation values, I can reconstruct the quantum state. For 2 qubits, I have to measure the 15 parameters I told you before, which correspond to 2 spin polarizations, the individual of each particle, and then I have to measure also the spin correlations between the particles. Now, I would like to highlight the concept of coherence because it plays a critical role in the presence of quantum correlations. So for density matrix, the concept of coherence is defined as the presence of non-diagonal elements in this density matrix expansion. And why is like this definition is because if I compute the expectation value of a certain observable O, I will always have the diagonal elements, which are quite classical. Like we can think that these diagonal elements are like probabilities because they are real numbers and sum to 1. But then we have non-diagonal elements, and these non-diagonal elements are sensitive to phases. So this gives to the famous interference terms, okay, the crossed terms between non-diagonal elements, which are sensitive to phases. They give to interference, arrays to interference. And in particular, notice that the coherence is a basis-dependent concept that depends on the situation of the observable or the experiment that we are analyzing. I can change basis, so my density matrix is diagonal, but depends on the basis and depends on the experiment if I'm going to see interference or not. However, you must notice now that when I have density matrices, because of this classical character I told you before, turns out that classical correlations can even emerge here for incoherent bipartite states. If I have a state of this form, which I can call it classical because it has no coherence, only has these real coefficients, which are like probabilities, this can exhibit all the correlations that can have a classical probability distribution. So you can say, okay, where is the quantum now? Because if I have this state, there is nothing particularly quantum. So we are going to analyze genuine manifestation of quantumness through different types of quantum correlations. And the most basic form of quantum correlation is the quantum discord. Quantum discord, this is a little complicated, and we are after lunch, so I will skip a little about this, but let's say that this concept arises by Zurek in this PRL of 2001, is that classically, you have two equivalent expressions for the mutual information of a bipartite system. You have the I, and you have this expression of here, this expression of here, and okay, they are equivalent classically. But when you go to quantum mechanics, you can prove that quantum mechanics can introduce a discord between the two expressions. So when you subtract them, you get something different from zero. And it turns out that apart from being the most basic form of quantum correlations, this form of quantum correlations is asymmetric. It's not the same, the discord of A with respect to B, than the B with respect to A. And okay, this is a little technical, so what is the physics here? Well, turns out that the only states that have zero discord are precisely these classical states I told you before, which are incoherent states in some orthonormal basis, where I can think this P and M as a classical probability distribution of occurring the state N and M. So what means discord is that if I have non-zero discord, it means that my state is coherent in any product basis I can imagine. So I cannot find any basis in which my state is going to be incoherent. So this shows that coherence is an essential feature for the presence of quantum correlations. And for qubits, we have a very simple intuition. If I have a classical state, which has this form of here, it's like having a classical way of thinking of heads and tails. I have four probabilities, or two heads, one head and one tail and one head, and the two tails. So you see, this is, if I have a state of this form, this is not very different from a classical probability distribution. So that's why I need discord, because discord tells me that no matter which basis I choose, I will never have an incoherent state. But now, let's say I can generalize this to the concept of separability. How do I do this? Okay, now imagine that I have the same expression, but now N and M can take any possible value because I'm going to consider states that are not necessarily orthonormal now. And that means that these P and M are not now probabilities, but they are quasi-probabilities because they don't describe disjoint events. They describe events with some overlap. So any classically correlated state described by some kind of classical probability is separable, okay? Like any kind of classical correlations you can imagine are described by separable states. And in particular, we are going to define entanglement now as the non-separability of a quantum state. So for 2 qubits, this has a very beautiful interpretation that I like a lot, is that separability is equivalent to the existence of a positive P representation. Imagine that I expand my state in terms of all possible spin directions, NA and NB, and I assign to them a probability distribution. Well, technically, this is not a probability distribution, it's a quasi-probability. Why? Because if I have the spin like this and I have the spin like this, they are not disjoint events. They have an negligible overlap, okay? The only two impossible events are when I have a spin like this and a spin like this, because they are orthogonal. But if not, they are not orthogonal, so it's a quasi-probability distribution. Nevertheless, if I compute expectation values, I get something of this type, that, okay, this is very classical. You see, this is a typical integral with some vectors. So this is nothing classical. This is nothing from the other world. So what is beautiful is that entanglement means that I cannot even find a positive P representation, which is something genuinely classical, because if I want to assign a probability of having the spin like this and this, at some point I have to put negative numbers. So that's very, very powerful, okay? That violates one of the hypotheses of Kolmogorov for statistics, okay? So it's much more powerful than discord. And to sign entanglement, there are many practical criteria. The most famous one, of course, is the Perez-Horodezky criterion, where if I take a separable state and I take partial transpose between, let's say, Bob, this state has to be non-negative. So if I find some negative eigenvalue for this partial transpose, then that means that rho is entangled. And this is extremely powerful because for 2 qubits on a qubit and a qubit, this is equivalent to entanglement. It's not only a sufficient criterion, but also necessary. More quantitative ways to measure entanglement is the so-called concurrence. This is a function that goes between 0 and 1, and is 0 if and only if the state is separable. Or equivalently, this is larger than 0 if the state is if and only if the state is entangled. And a more simple way to compute things is to design what is called an entanglement witness, which is a negative value observable, W, that is always, its expectation value for any separable state is larger than 0. So if I measure expectation value smaller than 0, then my state has to be entangled. Now, another type of quantum correlation, which is even stronger, is what is called the steering. Steering is the original way that Schrödinger conceived the EPR paradox. But however, it was only written in words. The precise formulation of this concept took 70 years. So it's something complicated, I will not go into the details, but the idea is that Schrödinger said that, okay, we are not going to sacrifice quantum mechanics, but I like locality, okay? So he thought that when Bob measures something on the other side of the universe, this affects the state of Alice, but still, the state of Alice can be described by some kind of local version of quantum mechanics, okay? And this is expressed in this way, okay? It has what is called a set of local hidden states. So if this is not true, that means that Bob can steer the Alice quantum state, and this is the concept of steerability. And a concept which is related from this, and is very, very fundamental, is the concept of the steering ellipsoid. So after Bob measurement, this is the normalized state of Alice, the rho n, is like given this expression, and is described by a block vector that depends on the spin measurement, the direction of the spin measurement of Bob. So it turns out that the set of all possible states that Bob can steer the qubit of Alice, the block vector of Alice, this spawns the surface of the so-called steering ellipsoid, which is a fundamental quantum information object, and it turns out that this is the way to represent two qubit states geometrically. For one qubit state, we have the Bloch sphere, but here we have the steering ellipsoid, which is described not only by the center of the ellipsoid, but also by these semi-axes and directions. So actually, you can also do it reversely. It's Alice who can steer the qubit of Bob, and this is also an asymmetric concept. And finally, we're going to study, to analyze the concept of Bell non-locality, which is the one that gives rise to the EPR paradox. So if you remember, the EPR paradox is a paradox posed by Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen, and they say that quantum mechanics challenges the idea of local realism. So for that purpose, Bell, in the 60s, he designed what is called a Bell test, in which, this version I'm going to give here is the CHSH inequality, but the idea is the foundation is the same. So the idea is that Alice and Bob, they perform spin measurements in two alternate axes, okay? So they measure correlations for one given axis and one given axis of Alice and Bob, they measure the correlations, okay? Given by these probabilities of outcomes of these predictive measurements. So local realism means that this probability has to be factorized like this, okay? This lambda is what is called the local hidden variables. So what John Bell proved is that, this is, as I told you, the CHSH inequality, which is a refined version of the Bell inequality, is that if any local realistic theory must satisfy this bound. Well, turns out that quantum mechanics can violate this bound up to has to be smaller than 2. Okay, quantum mechanics can reach 2 square root of 2, which is called the Searle bound. And what is beautiful here is that none of these places did I use quantum mechanics. This is a test that doesn't need any underlying model. The other three concepts I told you about, all of them involve the density matrix because they are quantum concepts. But this is a general concept which is agnostic, it doesn't use any particular model, and this is the beauty because it's just two people doing measurements. I don't need any other assumption about this. But we have to assume that they are locally separated, but okay, but you don't have to assume any particular theoretical model. And actually, all these correlations, they obey some quantum hierarchy. Steering and Discord are symmetric, but Bell non-locality and entanglement are symmetric, but nevertheless, they obey this hierarchy. Bell non-locality is a tighter form of quantum correlations. Then you have steering, then you have entanglement, then you have Discord. So you have a state that is Bell non-local, is steerable, is entangled, and exhibits Discord. But if you have a state that is entangled, it doesn't necessarily exhibit steerability or Bell non-locality. Okay, it goes in this way. So in the second part of the talk, I'm going to speak a little about my motivation to study these problems, which I think is interesting. So in this case, I would like to first make a toast for quantum optics, because light has motivated the major advancements in modern physics. We can start by the electromagnetic radiation through the Maxwell equations, but we also have special relativity, which was inspired by the Michelson-Morley experiment. Quantum mechanics was inspired by the first proof of quantum mechanics is the blackbody spectrum, also the photoelectric effect by Einstein. And in particular, from the quantum field theory point of view, it was the first quantized field. And in quantum information optics is also a major paradigm, not only because in the discrete variables of the photon, like the polarization of the orbital angular momentum, but also because of the continuous variables, which are the quantum amplitudes of the electromagnetic field, which give rise to the photons. In particular, the electromagnetic field, ignoring the vector nature of the electromagnetic field, is essentially quantized like a massless Klein-Gordon field. Okay? And when we impose the canonical commutation rules, and we expand this field in a Fourier expansion, turns out that the amplitudes of each mode, they behave like a harmonic oscillator. So essentially, a field is a collection of harmonic oscillators, and okay, then we can import all of our knowledge for the quantum mechanics textbooks that we all know, and we can study these problems using the usual tricks for the harmonic oscillator, namely the phase space variables, which are the position and the momentum of the harmonic oscillator, if you want. You can also have the number states. You can also have the coherent states. Coherent states are the eigenstates of the annihilation operator. And you can also have squeeze states. In this case, we focus on vacuum squeeze vacuums, which are the vacuums of some Bogoliubov transformation of the annihilation operator and the creation operator. So these are very important, for instance, in quantum optics and also even in quantum field theory, especially in curved spacetimes. In order to describe these systems, we can typically expand the number of states in the Fock basis of the number of states, of course. But there are more refined tricks to study these problems, which are the typical representations. One of them is the Glauber-Sudarsan, the P representation, which is like expanding, okay, this density matrix in terms of a diagonal set of coherent states. So when I compute normal order expectation values, it's like computing the equivalent C number integral of this type with this probability distribution, okay, and it's normalized to 1. Another one, which is extremely fundamental from the theoretical point of view, is the so-called Wigner representation, which is used to compute symmetric expectation values of the type A dagger I plus AA dagger. Because this one is like a quantum version of the Boltzmann distribution that we have for typical gases. So it plays a very important role in connecting classical and quantum physics. All of them are quasi-probability distributions, because if you remember, the coherent states from your quantum mechanics course, they are not orthogonal. This is pretty much what I told you about the spins. So this probability distribution does not describe the joint events. So the idea is that any general quantum state of the electromagnetic field can be described by this form of here. So some probability distribution over all possible amplitudes of all Fourier modes. Okay, and the classical electromagnetic field, the one that is now illuminating me in the screen, is described by a probability distribution where all the probabilities are larger than 0, okay, are positive, and all the amplitudes are very, very large, okay, with the relative uncertainty very small. So this is what we will call a classical electromagnetic field. So this is a key observation because it will help us to distinguish classical from quantum. In particular, the observation is that measurements are typically, in quantum optics, normal order expectation values. So if I have a positive P representation, I have somehow like a classical expectation value. So quantum correlations typically imply the presence of negative P representation, negative value P representations. In particular, to study correlations, we are going to also study again bipartite Hilbert spaces, where A and Bob are simply the Fock spaces of two modes AI and AJ. But now notice that these have infinite dimensions. So to study entanglement in infinite dimensions, okay, what is normally used is the generalized Peres-Hrodowski criterion, which was done by Simon in the 2000 year in this PRL. I will not go too much into the details, but the idea is that when I have a physical density matrix, I have what is called a non-negative covariance matrix, where I use this symplectic structure. Okay, I use this vector with the x and the p's of each mode. So then what I do is I take the partial transpose, as Peres-Hrodowski did, okay, for discrete systems. And when I do this in terms of the Wigner function, this just amounts to make a time inversion only with one subsystem for Bob, let's say. So if this covariance matrix, that is a form of right uncertainty in principle, begins negative value, then I have entanglement. And why is this so powerful? Well, for a very important class of states, which is Gaussian states, this generalized Peres-Hrodowski criterion is equivalent to entanglement. So it's very powerful to signal entanglement. But there are other ways for continuous systems to signal the presence of quantum correlations. And one of them, and it's very beautiful, is the Cauchy-Schwarz violation. So classical light satisfies this kind of expectation values. Because I have a positive P, I can write this inequality, and this inequality is explicitly based on the non-negativity of P, because then I can use this P to define an effective scalar product that I can derive this kind of inequalities using this effective scalar product. However, quantum operators do satisfy a exactly mathematical Cauchy-Schwarz inequality, which is this scalar product, which is the usual trace scalar product, but is weighted with rho. Okay? So now I have a quantum Cauchy-Schwarz inequality that is always satisfied. So that if you see, if I compare the classical and the quantum, I see that there is some difference between, I missed a square root here. So there is some room for the violation of this classical inequality. And in particular, squeeze states are well known to violate this Cauchy-Schwarz inequality, which is a signature that they are quantum. Okay? They cannot be described by a classical probability distribution. So indeed, when you have bipartite systems, you do quantum correlations between the systems. You can do either first order momenta or second order momenta, and you can write the classical and the quantum Cauchy-Schwarz inequalities. And an important thing is that the Cauchy-Schwarz violation is independent from entanglement. Okay? And this is a very simple example is to use a product of numbered states. This is a perfectly separable state. Nevertheless, when I write this Cauchy-Schwarz inequality, it's violated, the classical version, by this product of numbered states. Why is this? Well, this is a very profound thing, is that numbered states have negative value Wigner representations. And a negative value Wigner representation is a stronger manifestation of quantumness than just a negative Peer representation. So let's say that Boltzmann gets out of the grave and goes to the 21st century and see what are you doing with my distribution. And he sees a positive value Wigner representation. He will say, okay, this is what I was doing in the 19th century. Okay, I can go back to the grave. But if you see a negative Wigner representation, then that's more powerful than just a negative Peer representation. And in particular, it's a complementary test of quantumness. And indeed, you can use these techniques to analyze the problem of Hawking radiation, which, if you remember, there was some talk here yesterday about Hawking radiation. Hawking in the 70s predicted that black holes emit radiation with a black thermal spectrum, this is called Hawking radiation. Then Unruh, in 1981, he showed that the fluctuation of a potential ideal allotropic flow, these fluctuations behave exactly as a massless scalar field in a curved space-time. This observation gives rise to what is called to the field of analog gravity, that tried to study gravitational problems in the lab. And in particular, Garay, Anglin, Sirac, and Soler, Garay was my professor at Complutense, so I'm very proud of this. So they showed that Bose-Einstein condensates, they behave in some regime as a potential ideal allotropic fluid. And this shows that the Hawking effect is something universal. It was originally shown for a black hole, but it turns out that it is widely observed or can be observed in a wide range of systems. And the intuitive idea is very simple. So light cannot escape from a black hole. We know that. They are trapped inside the event horizon. And this is very analogous to the case in which sound cannot travel upstream in a supersonic flow. So a subsonic-supersonic interface behaves like the subsonic and the supersonic part of a flow, they behave like the exterior and interior of a black hole, and the interface is like the event horizon, because sound is trapped inside the supersonic region of the flow in the same way that light is trapped inside a black hole. And actually, this problem is very interesting because it's the problem that I studied during my PhD thesis. So I was studying what makes Hawking radiation quantum, because in an analog setup, you are going to have a competition. You're going to have the genuine Hawking effect, which is a zero-point quantum effect, but you're going to also to have a thermal or coherent stimulation of the condensate that will stimulate Hawking radiation. So what happens, and this is something very powerful, is that only the genuine quantum Hawking effect is going to give rise to Cauchy-Schwarz violations or to entanglement weaknesses. So we can use the presence of quantum correlations to analyze a precise signal that is very, very difficult to observe in a real experiment. And actually, what I proved during I was first focused on the Cauchy-Schwarz inequalities, then the group of Renaud Parentani and Jacopo Carusotto, they were focused on entanglement, and then eventually proved that in typical analog scenarios, both concepts are equivalent. In general, they are not, but for Hawking radiation, in typical scenarios, they are equivalent. So indeed, the first experimental evidence of the Hawking effect, done by Jeff Steinhauer in his laboratory, was through an entangled measurement of Hawking radiation. This was the first preliminary observation of Hawking radiation. This also served later for the basis of a more conclusive observation of the Hawking effect, which is the one that I did with him because I joined during my postdoc to Jeff Steinhauer as an experimentalist to work in observing for the first time in a conclusive way the Hawking radiation. We observed actually even the thermal character of the spectrum. Okay, this is what you see here. is what is called the Hawking mustache, because it's the correlations between the particle and antiparticle emitted by the black hole. And this is the best picture we have up to date of, and the only one, by the way. There is not, it's the only experiment that has ever observed Hawking radiation. This is the best picture we have ever of Hawking radiation until date. So I will now switch to the part of quantum colliders. So this tells me like, okay, I'm a condensed matter physicist. I don't work in particle physics. So why am I here? Okay, why did I win this award? Okay, so my motivation was that, okay, there are many analogies between the field theories that we use in condensed matter and that we use in quantum optics. So can we study this kind of problems that we study in the low energy laboratories in high energy physics, which is a relativistic quantum field theory? Well, I always was intrigued by this because I was friend with Yoav Afik, and we were taking coffees, we were speaking about life many times, very few times about physics, but I was still intrigued about what he was doing. So one day, I asked him during taking a coffee if he could measure a Cauchy-Schwarz violation in a collider. And I have to explain, like, okay, this Cauchy-Schwarz is like entanglement, but not. But he told me, okay, this thing of the Cauchy-Schwarz is strange, okay? Now, entanglement sounds better. Tell me more, and please, what do you have with fermions? And they say, okay, with fermions it's different. What I told you is you have the spin, and the spin is like a qubit, and they have these Pauli matrices, and they are products. And he told me, okay, this sounds very nice. Give me a sec, okay. So during the coffee breaks of several weeks, we were discussing, and eventually one day he came to my office and showed me one single equation on top quarks from this paper by Ben Reuther, and he showed me this equation. And this equation is pretty much what I showed you before with the Pauli matrices. So I was amazed to see this. So it turns out that top quarks are a rather sophila of a relativistic two-qubit system, because they have a huge potential, okay? They have the canonical form of a two-qubit system. So one will say, okay, but why is this interesting? Because, okay, high-energy colliders, they are described by QFT, so they should be quantum by definition. Well, okay, not so fast. First of all, we are doing momentum measurements. We introduce a lot of decoherence. We are projecting onto momentum, so it's very difficult to access to some kind of entanglement in momentum. It's going to be difficult. Also, we don't control the initial internal degrees of freedom of the colliding beam. So that introduces further decoherence because we have to average incoherently over many realizations. Moreover, the typical objects that we measure in a collider are cross-sections, lifetimes, which are essentially classical objects because they are probability distributions, okay? So they don't have any kind of quantum limitation. And something which is conceptual, I think we like to also highlight, is that normally in QFT, but also this happens in condensed matter. In condensed matter is because of the orthogonality catastrophe, but we are concerned about expectation values. Many times we just care, okay, what is my expectation value? We don't care about the internal structure of the quantum state. So that's why many times we are missing these kind of problems. And in particular, at that time, there was already some precedent studies of quantum information and high energy physics, or at least some intersections. For instance, the Professor Yu Shi was studying entanglement in relativistic quantum field theory already in 2004 in a general theoretical way. There were some studies in colliders about violation in flavor degrees of freedom of Bell inequality using mesons. There is also some attempts to study quantum problems with neutrino oscillations. A very challenging, mind-blowing line of research is studying quantum information as a fundamental principle of nature. Okay, perhaps quantum information is the one that sets the symmetries of the standard model. This is this line of research. There's also a very practical, this is very connected to this conference in this practical way, of studying entanglement in positron electron tomography, positron emission tomography in PET scan. And also there is an approach in which they import techniques for entanglement and quantum information to study QCD interactions. However, let's say that when we were studying this problem, a precise dictionary that was translating quantum information concepts into high energy magnitudes in a precise way was still missing. And it was missed, and this is what we aim to do with this paper. This is the one that received the prize. We studied entanglement and quantum tomography with top quark satellite C. And actually, this dictionary was missed for a long time because the paper took 1.5 years to be published, and it was rejected 6 times in a row. Okay, it took a lot of time to publish this paper. And actually, it was published by pity. Okay, I have been rejected many times in my life, And this was another occasion in which I was rated many times. And it was published just by pity. The editor said, okay, the European Physical Journal Plus told, okay, we archive sound science papers. Okay, just that, not interesting, just sound. And after this work, we extend this formalization to make like the full theoretical framework with the complete dictionary of quantum information and high energy magnitudes. So how this thing works? Okay, so we are going to study top anti-top TT-bar, okay, top anti-top production. And when we study this problem, we normally go to the center of mass frame. And in this center of mass frame, the kinematics of the pair is determined just by the invariant mass and the top direction. Okay, this is for instance, in the case of two proton collidings, the top goes over here. Okay, this is the direction of the top, and you only determine this problem by the invariant mass, which is related by this formula to the top velocity. Okay, and the minimal energy of the system is twice the mass of the top, which is because it's the minimal energy for threshold production of two tops. Now, this is the kinematics. What happens with the quantum state? Well, what happens typically is that I have some initial state, I, which has some typical internal degrees of freedom, which we don't have access, lambda, and this gives a top and anti-top. So, from the quantum information point of view, the TT-bar spins are described by the so-called production spin density matrix, which you can write in terms of the T matrix, like this, okay? So, this is pretty much like the cross section, but alpha and beta are different. Aquí you have alpha beta, and you have alpha prime, beta prime. So what happens is that in experiment, we have momentum measurements, that is why they are only momentum, and then we have to average over events. So this gives rise to a density matrix description from the very beginning. Colliders, experiments are never described by pure states. They are always described by a density matrix. Okay, this is something that many people sometimes ignore. And what you have to do is just to average over the internal degrees of freedom. And by normalizing this production metrics, you get, voila, your density matrix, which is perfectly well normalized. So to study this problem with top quarks, we are going to make an illustrative example, which is leading order QCD calculation, because first it's analytical, simple. The next two leading order corrections are small, okay? And these are the actual building blocks of any actual high energy process. So the most elementary QCD process to produce top and anti-top are Q-bar, annihilation, and gluon fusion. So each of these initial states, through these diagrams, give rise to a quantum state that we can call ρi. Okay, because the I is the initial state. So in a real process, of course, we know that there are no free quarks or gluons. They are inside hadrons. Okay, hadrons are bound states of quarks and gluons, and because they are forming part of the hadron, this was, I think it was Feynman who called this name, is partons. They are called partons. Quarks and gluons, when they are forming part of an hadron, they are called indistinctively, they are called partons. At colliders like the LHC or the tevatron, what we have is proton-proton or proton-antiproton collisions at very high energy center of mass energies. So this is for the LHC, and this is for the tevatron. And actually, the quantum state now depends on the center of mass energy. And what happens is that the quantum state is simply a mixture, an incoherent mixture, of each individual quantum state I showed you before, this ρi. And this is a probability, this is a weighted probability that is computed with what is called parton distribution functions. I'm not going to enter. So what we have is a problem in which QCD gives us the probabilities and the quantum states. This is what you have typically gave me. And then we have a quantum information output, which is a textbook problem of the convex sum of quantum states. And in particular, at LHC, gluon fusion dominates, while the tevatron, what dominates is quark-anti-quark annihilation. A thing that we can do in a collider is, if you remember, this was the most general 2-qubit density matrix with these 15 parameters that I told you before, the two vectors and the correlation matrix. So these spin coefficients can be characterized in principle in any basis, and one that we normally use is implicit basis, in which K goes, this is KRN, K goes in the direction of the top, in the center of mass frame, R is the perpendicular vector inside the scattering plane, and N is the normal vector to the scattering plane. And this P, which you here, is the direction of the beam. And this basis is typically chosen because it has a good behavior under Lorentz transformations and some symmetries. In particular, the quantum state satisfies these symmetries. First, because of the approximate CP invariance of the standard model, the polarizations are equal and the correlation matrix is symmetric. At linear the QCD, the state is unpolarized, and the spin along the n direction in the perpendicular plane is uncorrelated to the other directions. So from the quantum information perspective, what we have is that the total quantum state is a T state. A T state means that it's unpolarized, with a very simple structure, because only 4 parameters are non-zero that you see here. These CKKs here are, because it's symmetric, you have this diagonal is the same, and then CNN. You only have 4 parameters, and they are only function of the production angle, that is the angle of the top with respect to the initial beam, and the energy, the invariant mass of the top quark, pair. Sorry. And in particular, for such a simple state, you can prove, okay, for this structure, that the concurrence that I told you measures the amount of entanglement. You can prove that the state is entangled if and only if this quantity delta is larger than 0. Okay, it involves just these coefficients of here. It's very simple.
Missing something here. So to relate the measured angular correlations to the spin coefficients, you are assuming quantum mechanics.
Yes.
So then how would you test it?
We are not testing quantum mechanics. We just want to see the quantum states that we have. We don't want to. We want to do quantum information. Quantum information assumes quantum mechanics. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is being tested?
We are not testing nothing. We are only saying, well, if you want, we are testing the separability of the quantum state. But we are not testing. We are not testing nothing yet. We are simply describing.
Sorry, then I misunderstood. I thought you were going to test quantum mechanics.
No. We're not. No. We are not going to test quantum mechanics at any point. We are not doing a Bell test. We are not doing a Bell test, if you want. We are just testing the separability of a quantum state. We are analyzing first we are analyzing the quantum state from a theoretical point of view.
Sure.
Then we will do a measurement, and you will see what is the measurement about. But we are not testing quantum mechanics, okay? So no problem with that. So in particular, when you make a study of the quantum information structure of the quantum states, you see that you have 2 main regions of entanglement. So what you see here is this is gluon-gluon production, quark-antiquark annihilation, and this is the concurrence. So you see two strong regions of entanglement. So in the ultra-relativistic regime, that is transverse production, okay, and very high energies, you have something very red here. Okay, this is because the quantum state is in a spin triplet, which is maximally entangled. Okay, this is both for quark-antiquark and gluon-gluon, and this is common because at these very high energies, orbital angular momentum dominates the production mechanism. Now, just for gluon-gluon, because of the structure of the production, you have that at threshold, just exactly at the minimum energy that they have, you have that the quantum state is in a spin singlet, which is also maximally entangled. So that explains these maximal entanglement regions here for the gluon-gluon and this one for quark-antiquark. And when you go to real colliders, because the LHC is dominated by gluon, this is a diluted version of this over here, and the tevatron is a diluted version of this plot over here. That essentially the structure survives. So how do we measure this? We are going to measure this through this formula. This is why top quarks are so nice. So what they have is that the top quarks, when they decay, and you focus on 2 products, in particular with leptons, you can fit all the coefficients, all the spin coefficients of the expansion from the differential cross-section. You can measure the spin polarizations of each top and the spin correlation matrix by using the angular distribution of the leptons of the decay of the top and the top quark. And because they decay very fast, there is no decoherence. Okay, it decays extremely fast, so they decay like this to a boson and a W, and the W decays to a lepton and a neutrino, and similar here. You just focus on the leptons, you see their directions, especially in the parent rest frame where they decay, and because of some properties, you can measure any coefficient of this expansion. So it means that we can reconstruct the whole density matrix, and we can do quantum tomography in a high energy collider, which is very impressive. Okay, so this is very complicated to do normally in the lab, but in a collider, it turns out that we can do quantum tomography. You can reconstruct the quantum state of the top quark. So to analyze this cross-section, these problems, what happens is that in real measurements, we make averages over many different processes to increase the signal. So we are going to define a quantum state in a region pi of phase space, MTT bar and k, where k is the direction. We integrate over some region, and this probability of here is nothing else than the cross-section, okay? And this notion of total quantum state is the one that describes experiments. And it's very simple and intuitive to understand why. This total quantum state is just a mixture of all possible individual quantum states, this row over here, this is the ones that I showed you before, and they are weighted with a probability p, which is proportional to differential cross-section. Then I only have to normalize finally with the total cross-section of the process, but it's simply multiplying the cross-section by the quantum state, integrate, and normalize. That's all, that's very simple. So now what we have is a QCD input, you give me the probabilities and the density matrix, and again, we have a quantum information textbook problem of the convex sum of quantum states. So, in particular, for the experimental scheme that we proposed back then, we focused on threshold because the signal was much larger, where you have more top quarks close to threshold. So what we propose is this total quantum state was just implemented by putting a cut on the upper energy, an upper cut on the energy that we put. Okay, we go from threshold to some upper cut. We now, because we're going to average over all possible directions, we're going to use the so-called beam basis, because it's fixed in space, and also it has very nice properties. C is along the beam axis, and XY and transverse to the beam. And because of the symmetry, because there is rotational symmetry around the beam, turns out that the correlation matrix takes this extremely simple form. You only have two transverse correlations and one longitudinal spin correlations. So you simplify a lot the formulas, and with that, we can make finally the real plots. These are real predictions for experiments. And you can see that you only have two coefficients, C perpendicular and CC. And you can prove that entanglement occurs if and only if you have something here. And in particular, C perpendicular close to threshold is negative. So you have this very simple criterion. If the trace of the correlation matrix is smaller than -1, the state is entangled. Okay? And in particular, we can translate this into an observable D, which is the trace of the correlation matrix over 3, because D can be measured for a cross-section. If you measure the cross-section describing the angular distribution of the lepton separation, cos phi, you get this cross-section of here, and you can just, by doing this experiment, with only one magnitude, you can tell if the state is entangled or not. So this is the typical plot of D, so it's very entangled here, very below -1/3, and it begins to grow from threshold to some upper cut. So if we put some cut along 400 GeV, we have a very strong signal of entanglement, and this is the typical uncertainty. So if I try to measure the number of uncertainties that I can have in experiment, red, this strong red means 5 sigma. So if I have precisions up to 10%, if I put a cut over 400, I still have a 5 sigma if I have a relative uncertainty of 10%, which is very high. Okay, so indeed, what is beautiful is that actually this condition, the trace of the correlation matrix is smaller than -1, is a simple entanglement criterion because it's actually a Cauchy-Schwarz violation. You can see that the trace of the correlation matrix is just the product of the spins. When you use the P representation, this is just the average of the cosine between the two spins, and this has to be, if this is positive, this has to be smaller than 1. So if I have this condition of here, this means that I have a cosine that in average is larger than 1. So this is very strange. How can I have a cosine that is larger than 1? Well, because we have negative probabilities in quantum mechanics sometimes. So in particular, you can prove that in general, this is an entanglement witness. Specifically, it's not just a leading order concept, it's in general, this is an entanglement witness with a genuine quantum range. D at most can be -1, but any value below -1/3 means that the state is entangled. The same applies to this state of here and to this observable of here. And what is important to notice is that delta larger than 0, this concurrence I told you before, if I measure delta larger than 0, this is always a sufficient condition for entanglement. Okay? So in particular, we propose this proposal in summary. You have to measure D below -1/3, close to threshold, using the angular separation of leptons. Okay? This was our experimental proposal. This experimental proposal was implemented by the ATLAS and CM exploration at the LHC, and they got an observation of entanglement with more than 5 sigma, and in particular, these are the highest energy observation of entanglement ever. So this is a very a milestone. In particular, the ATLAS paper was published in Nature, and actually, Yoav and I have the unique experience to participate in the experimental implementation of our proposal, and in particular for me, it was something incredible because I don't work in high energy physics, so it's very rare for someone outside high energy physics to collaborate inside a collider collaboration. It was a quite unique experience. And finally, I just will briefly outline the impact of our work. So in another work that by me and Yoav, what we make is to extend this study of entanglement to the whole quantum correlation hierarchy, which, surprise, surprise, is respected by top quarks. So in particular, you will see here Discord in the same setups I told you before, okay, as usual. Close to threshold and in the ultra-realistic regime is very intense for gluon, and for quark anti-quark, you only have strong Discord in the ultra-relativistic regime. And when you plot the boundaries, you see that the quantum correlation hierarchy is perfectly respected. Also, these quantum correlations inspire the concept of new physics witnesses. The approximate ship invariance of the standard model implies that the correlation matrix is symmetric and that the polarizations of the top and anti-top are the same. So that means that you have symmetric Discord and steering. So any asymmetry that you observe in these magnitudes implies that there must be some underlying CP-violated new physics. So this, in analogy with the concept of entanglement witness, we propose new physics witnesses, which are symmetry-protected observables by the standard model, which can only become new zero in the presence of new physics, because they don't have a standard model contribution. And we can describe this concept within the more general approach of using quantum information techniques for novel new physics searches. There are now a number of works using this kind of quantum information techniques to try to look for new physics. There has been also further experimental milestones. One of them is, for instance, they have also observed the ultra-relativistic entanglement I told you before with top quarks. It was observed by the CMS collaboration. We also participated with CMS people and Atlas people in analyzing existing data, and we experimentally checked the quantum correlation hierarchy for top quarks, Discord, entanglement, steering, and Bellon locality. And also, very recently, they observed entanglement with in C bosons by the Atlas collaboration. Another milestone from this field of quantum information has been the observation or the almost observation of toponym. So this is the Atlas result in which we took part, and you see that very close to threshold, which is the measurement of here, there is a huge disagreement between simulation and experiment. So this was interpreted as a signal of the formation of toponym. Toponym is a quasi-bound state of top anti-top quark that is formed from non-relativistic QCD interactions. And this is a spin singlet, so it's maximally entangled, so it contributes to this entanglement witness I told you before. It increases the entanglement. That's why the experimental data was more entangled than expected. So you can think about toponym, if you want, like some kind of QCD hydrogen atom, okay, of top anti-top quark. The signal that this gives in the cross-section is a very small peak that is impossible to be resolved, at least at the LHC. So this was thought to never be observed, at least in LHC. So by using this kind of quantum information techniques and the kind of observables I told you before, based on these entanglement witnesses, it turns out that they have observed, finally, this non-relativistic enhancement of the cross-section due to the formation of toponym, and this has been observed very recently by the Atlas collaboration and also by the CMS. So this is a practical consequence of entanglement, not just from a fundamental point of view, but it's a practical consequence of entanglement, pretty much like the Hawking radiation I told you about. Because what happens is that toponym contributes to this entanglement witness. Also, there are alternative systems. In particular, we have alternative qubits. We have the top quark. The bottom quark is a work that I did with Yoav and also with Avner Sofer, David Zuzan, and Evgeny Katz. You also have, you can also use as a qubit the tau lepton. This is a work done by Marco Fabricesi and his group. You also can do it quantum information with W's, which are massive gauge bosons. So they have spin 1. So they are Q-treats. This was done by Alan Bath, a professor at Oxford. And you can also use the C0 boson, which is another massive gauge boson. So it's another Q-treat. And this one was proposed by Juan Antonio Aguilar Saavedra and Alberto Casas and his group, and their group. So this is we have this for the moment, these 5 qubits and Q-treats. Other kind of complementary approaches is the study of quantum interference in a collider, the study of magic, the entanglement autodistillation, indistinguishability, and also they are also studying scattering processes as quantum gates. Finally, to conclude, I would like to highlight something that was impregnated along all the talk, because we have quantum field theory, we have gravity, we have quantum information, we have quantum optics. So interdisciplinarity is one of the main scientific paradigms of the century, and actually this conference is a strong proof of that. Another consequence of our work that I like to highlight is that entanglement is a great practical resource for quantum information. It's not just a fundamental topic. It's a tool that we can use, and in particular it was used to signal the presence of toponym. And in particular, the interplay between quantum information and high-energy physics has a huge potential and great interest, not only because it provides a new knob, a new tool for high-energy physics to search for new physics or other standard model predictions, but also for quantum information it's very exciting to study the problems in a genuine relativistic environment which has a genuine fundamental nature. We don't have relativistic qubits so often in the lab, let's say. And actually, one of the beautiful things is that a huge community on quantum information and high-energy physics has been formed. And actually, we published this joint paper by more than 70 authors, which come from both theory and experiment, and both from quantum information and high-energy physics. And you can think that's a kind of quantum manifesto. And something that is very beautiful is that because of my work on this topic, I have the chance to visit two major structures from two very different fields. This is the Xusheng computer, Xusheng 3.0, which is in the Shanghai Institute of Advanced Technologies. I had the chance to visit last year. So this is one of the most advanced quantum computers in the planet. This represents the quantum information part. And this, what you see here, this is the Atlas detector, which is, and this is another thing that I have the chance to visit when I was at CERN. So these very beautiful and very expensive machines are joined by this field. So this is something that, and I have the chance to visit them. So this is something that is very beautiful to think that these incredible machines are joined in somehow. And just to conclude, I would like to acknowledge people that have supported us, because at the beginning this project was very difficult. And in particular, I would like to thank my advisor, Fernando Sols, and me and Joab, we'd like to thank him because he provided a very, very strong support at the beginning, and also during the whole project and the development of this quantum information field. He provided a very strong support and wise advice throughout the project. And we'd also like to thank other colleagues who provided useful discussions and valuable comments for our work. To all the enthusiastic community that has gathered around this very thrilling project, because it's has been very nice with us. And finally, we would like to thank our committee for selecting our work for the prize. And thanks a lot for your attention.